This is the Cedar Creek Church Living It Out podcast, a midweek reminder where we discuss key takeaways and principles from the weekend message to help you live out the truth that you matter.
All right, welcome to the Living It Out podcast, a weekly podcast to remind you that you matter and help you live out that truth throughout the week. My name is Ben Bacher, and I am here with Marna Ward today. Marna, how are you?
Good. Hey, everybody.
We are in a series called Haunted. Just finished up the second week.
Yeah.
And Lauren Snyder was our speaker. And as we were thinking about Haunted, I was just on a trip up north, and we were in a little town called...
You got to take a trip away.
We did. We took a trip
I'm
away.
Really proud of you
great.
guys.
I know. It's not something we often do with little kids at home, but everything
good
worked
for
out
you.
well. It was our anniversary, and we just kind of went up and down the Lake Michigan coastline.
Oh, yeah.
There's a little town there that we did not stop in, but we buzzed
is it
through.
haunted?
It's called Manistee.
Okay.
It's not haunted, but we saw a haunted ship.
What?
Like the end of the ship kind of opens up where cars can drive on it and everything. So they had that docked up against the shoreline.
Oh, yeah.
They had it open. And the first time we went by, it was it was like 11 in the morning or something. And I was like, ooh, that looks interesting.
We should go do that.
And then on the way home, like it was going, like it was up and running, and there were like tons of cars parked and kids running to it, and I was like, we should do that. And my wife's like, no way.
It's like the video that they did this weekend with Sarah and Ray. The opening video was these scary, through, and I mean, like Sarah was screaming so loud through half of it that I wondered if it's like you're like, this will actually be kind of fun, and Mary's like,
absolutely, yeah. She would have screamed through the whole thing. And it would have been a total blast.
It was definitely fun to watch them go through that, and for the most part, be like, boy, I'm glad that's not me,
right.
sort of thing.
So
but,
how are you with the like haunted houses and all that?
I mean, I just never did that stuff much as a kid, and it would be kind of fun to do it now to see like how much would it get in your head, kind of thing. But I mean, we had the advantage of like the lights from the camp, like it's like I can't. It was hard to appreciate that it's pitch dark everywhere around you. I had an experience one time. I was up at this conference and I was with a bunch of college students, and one of the aspects of the conference was to take a night walk. And that was, I mean, there was nothing actually haunted, but it was like 11 o'clock. Everybody's got flashlights. We're in the woods. It's supposed to be this like moment. Ben, what in the world? Like, first of all, you're like every snap, every crack, every, kind of thing. It's like, wait, do we have everybody with us? And it was this whole thing. So I'm guessing I wouldn't be great at it, but it would be kind of fun to do it.
I know the metro parks do that right now. Like they do every month a night walk where you can sign up and show up to one of the metro parks, and they just walk through the woods in the middle of the dark.
It's a totally different
experience. They have flashlights and stuff, but there's times they're like, okay, everybody turn their lights off. And we did it, I think, last year with my little girls, and they were brave, but it was definitely
different.
It's
different. So
well, very fun. So this weekend, Lauren talked. Her bottom line was, instead of wallowing in the meh, welcome to the meaningful. And one of the things she talked about right up front was just people's well-being, and she had a scale for that. And she said, no, not everybody is, low, and not everybody's high, but usually most people are in the middle, kind of in
that 4 to 7, 8 range. Yeah.
What were some of your thoughts, like when did that surprise you, or you're like, yeah, that sounds about right?
Yeah, it got me to thinking some just about life stage, like just reflecting back over different life stages. If I would have, it's just sort of that would obviously have impacted my rating.
Right.
I loved the idea of it being on a scale too, that not everything is way over here and not everything's way over there, but typically I kind of agreed. Part of me kind of didn't want to, because you want to be like, really? I bet I'm probably on the high. And then the more that you kind of think about it, it's like, no, there's actually a lot of things that are kind of meh, or that I'm always looking forward to something or having on the calendar that I'm responsible for it and getting it done.
Right.
But is it not meh? I don't.
Right.
So I thought it was maybe more challenging than even on the surface we could have taken it.
Yeah. No, I like how you said that, like kind of, seasons in life, and then just even seasons on the calendar, like, when you're just in the routine and the rhythm of, okay, I'm in the grind right now, but then, and she talks about having things to look forward to, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but like then you have Christmas and then New Year's and then
it's
what's
like
the
these
next
ebbs
thing?
and flows, right?
So I think those are important to have and kind of keep you, when things are getting routine and monotonous, to be like, okay, what's that next thing I'm looking forward to, or what can I do? And we'll talk about some of this stuff a little bit too. She talked about something that Jesus invites us to do. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think one of the things too with this series is that if we're really taking a look at how our mind plays tricks on us, that so much of us in terms of where we are on the scale is really dictated by thoughts, and by the things that are primary for us. And I think that the verse that she used in terms of stepping into it, where Jesus teaches about this, is through Matthew 11:29-30. So let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. Right. And so that's what really started for me. It was like, okay, so if the Met is our everyday and the things that we're responsible for, or even where we are struggling, if we're lower on that scale, so often you feel like if you've been on the life-changing adventure, it's like, oh, well, Jesus is the answer. And he is. And he gives us this very practical sort of visual of a yoke. And she talked about that in terms of it being something that really allowed a leader to guide two oxen to move in the same direction. And so when I think about how all of this starts to connect, it's like, well, how does that work? How is it that Jesus's burden is light? If he says it, it's true. And yet, how are we actually experiencing that? How are our thoughts reflecting it? And again, some of what we're really exploring in the series is how powerful our thoughts and our mind is towards our well-being.
Right. I loved it. She talked about a legend of, I researched it a little bit. And it was like this legend of, Jesus was a carpenter. So there's a chance that that's something that he made, were these yokes. And just this idea of having a sign, at his business or above his door that said something like, these yokes are made for you, or handmade specially to fit you. And I just thought, wow, that's kind of a cool thing when he talks about a yoke, and he talks about just being able to lean on him. It's not just like just randomly. It's like he knows exactly who you are, what you need, what your thoughts are, how to replenish you, and all those things. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, me too.
So she talked about takeaways, just some practical things we can do. And we talk about this quite often, how we're a multi-dimensional being with, spiritual, mental, physical. And she talked about some things that we can do to cultivate meaning in each one of those areas. First, cultivate meaningfulness in your heart. That kind of is spiritual. Yeah. So what are some things that she talked about there?
Yeah, prayer was a big piece of this part, and she had a very specific welcoming prayer that she walked us through that was written a long time ago. And what I love about this turn towards the meaningful, that's essentially what Matt is really poking at, right? And then Jesus steps into that and goes, hey, I'm humble and gentle. I'll give you rest. And so now as you step into the okay, if that's what it looks like for us to follow Jesus, and if this is what he gives us, which is easy to bear and a burden that's light, then how does that, to your point, where does that meaning come from then? And so whether it's mental, spiritual, or physical, these were all the aspects that start to work together towards the burden being light. I have to remind myself all the time that when the burden is heavy, that's about, I've taken on something, something's happening inside me, that this isn't, this is a promise that Jesus gives us. And yet so often I walk around sort of way down and everything's, so heavy. And so this, I think, from starting with the spiritual, so the inside out of cultivating that meaningfulness is really bringing a spirit of prayer, and helping to cultivate that practice throughout. So that welcoming prayer was sort of you can do it in the morning. She kind of recommended that just by the nature of those words. But it really is, I think, what's happening inside us when we say those words, and it doesn't have to be that prayer. I do love how she walked us through it, though. There's something powerful about, I think, praying. We don't always have to have the words. In fact, a lot of times we don't. And so using something like that to just step into being ready for what God has for us for the day can take it from something that is meh to meaningful. It can adjust the way that we think about something, and starting with the spiritual on that. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah. No, well, I know. I was going to say, we were talking about before we started the podcast, just that idea of praying a prayer that's already written. And for some people, that's kind of,
it's like, what? I should be able to have my own. Yeah.
Right. But like, I think that meaningful prayer, for Lauren, it just really helps keep things on track. She hits some, really key points and ideas that's like, man, I just need to ask God to do this. So I think having a written prayer or praying scripture or doing something like that a lot of times helps keep us focused. It helps us, just really cultivate meaningfulness in the heart, which is what the whole point was to that spiritual component.
Yep. I think too, what I love about the multidimensional being is that it doesn't leave any piece out, right? Like as we move to mental and you think about that aspect, like that welcoming prayer impacts our thoughts.
Right.
It's what starts to get us into a place where our thinking gets adjusted. I am so always amazed at how quickly we can turn on a dime, right? Like our thoughts can be tracking down one way and then somebody will say something, or you'll hear something on the radio or you read something and all of a sudden it's like you see it differently.
Right.
And I think we don't always, maybe we take that for granted, or we think that we see it and we're trekking, and then something enters in. And so this was really stepping into, where do we fix our thoughts? What does that look like? And how, honestly, we can quickly change a meh moment to something that's meaningful if we can lean into some of the, what are the thoughts that are happening? Where are we focused? And she talked about Philippians 4:8 in terms of some of the things we can think about and put our thoughts on to break that cycle.
Yeah, Philippians 4:8. I'll read it real quick.
Yeah.
It says, "And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing: fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about these things that are excellent and worthy of praise." And you think about each one of those: true, honorable, right, pure, lovely, admirable. It's like, wow, that you do that and you're going to have a pretty good thought life. You're going to be mentally in a good place. And I think that's true, just starting there, because a lot of times we'll fixate on a lie or something that's not true, or we'll be like,
speaking of what we fix our thoughts on.
right. So I think Paul was intentional about starting with that one for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a really beautiful way to think about, thinking, which is kind of wild, but yeah, I think if we're not cognizant of it, then we can fall into the wallowing, or and me too. This is not, I think we're all in it in terms of, how do I change those moments to be grateful, and to fix our eyes on these places where it's like, okay, God, I know that you're here, filling us, even when you start with that prayer of, what did I welcome in today, and how am I then accessing that throughout the day, through my thought life.
Yeah, that's great. The last one she talked about was physical and cultivate meaningful experiences. And I loved how she talked about just, having fun in our lives. And I think that's where, one of the first questions she asked in this talk was, what do you do for fun? And, so if you want to talk a little bit about that and kind of how she walked through that.
Yeah, I think just it's tough as adults that we have to schedule fun. Do you remember like when we were lots younger and you didn't have to put it on the calendar? It was like, this is just what we were doing.
Day, yeah.
And at the same time, I think we have this really unique opportunity at some of the stages that we're in to really really go, what is fun for me now? She talked about burnout, that one of the lead indicators for senior pastors to actually burn out or want to walk away from that profession is a hobby. And that is not exclusive to them. In fact, it probably reaches far into people's other leadership roles, and potentially where one of you who's listening may find yourself is if we don't have something that is meaningful and fun to us, that helps to unlock just some creativity and that lightness in us, then the meh is going to go real quick the other way, and we're going to find ourselves in a very difficult spot, because our thoughts are so impacted by the experiences that we're having, what we do spiritually. And I think in some ways, the defining your fun, it kind of goes back to Paul's verse. If it's the things that are true and honorable and right and pure and lovely,
right.
There are hobbies and things that we all do that help us to focus on those things. Obviously, if it's an unhealthy hobby, totally different conversation, right? But for the most part, I think what she talked about was defining it, giving yourself permission for the fun, scheduling it, and then just keep moving in that direction. And when we talk about fun, it's really leaning on those things that Paul talks about. Yeah, the
permission one was interesting for me. I think, it's like, okay, do I give myself permission to have fun? And that might seem, well, of course, but I think there's different areas in our life too. Do you give yourself permission to have fun at home, at work, and all these different areas?
That's a great point.
And then scheduling fun too. I don't know, if you don't have a hobby, I think that's where, or if maybe you do have a hobby, but it never fits in your schedule. You're like, oh, I used to do this, or man, I wish I could find time to do my hobby or whatever. So I think, putting it on the calendar, if you're married, having conversations with your spouse about it, and just getting that on the calendar is so important. Yeah,
it really does impact all of our thinking and the ways that we approach our life, and some of the meh that may actually be indicators that we're not doing these things. It may not be that our life is meh. It may actually be the whole way that we're approaching some of it. So, yeah.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this, I would just, think about those things spiritually, mentally, physically, write it down. What are you doing to cultivate meaningfulness in your heart? In your thinking, and meaningful experiences too. Have conversations with your group, if you're in a group, with them, or with your family and friends as well.
Yeah.
Just keep the conversation going. So moving forward, we have a women's event.
Speaking of fun, like we've got our women's event that's coming up November 18th. We felt like this was just the right time for a women's event. Life has been rather complicated. Women tend to wear a lot of hats and play a lot of roles. And this is really a night to set all of that aside and spend some time with God and with other women who are on the life-changing adventure. For women who are not on the life-changing adventure, it will be a welcoming environment. We are deep in the plans for women's event. And so we would love, in fact, we've had over 100 women that have registered already.
Great.
So it's probably not something you want to wait a real long time to do. But grab a friend, to your point, grab a group. This might be something to put on the calendar to look forward to. We're going to hear from our friend, Barb Bruce, and we have a comedian. Her name is Kristen Weber coming, who was just hysterical. We had a chance to talk with her on the phone, and she has an accordion. So buckle up, everybody.
Oh wow.
So fun, laughter, some learning, some key takeaways. And so we hope that you'll join us on the 18th. You can go to cedarcreek.tv women's event and register there. It's $20 a person.
That's awesome. With that comedian, I was thinking, my wife and I, like, all the shows we watch are super serious, like dramas.
Yeah, you're like, we need some laughter.
We need some laughter. And I remember Ben Snyder talking about that, like listening to comedians in the morning or doing something.
Yeah.
So one, I think that's great. We have a comedian at that event, but two, that's another, potential takeaway from Lauren's message, schedule some fun, listen to some comedians, watch some funny shows as well.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks, Marna, for joining me. And for you listening, thanks so much for making this part of your day. We hope that this time has reminded you that you matter and helps you live out that truth throughout the week.